Of supreme importance in the mission of the Church is the role that the laity fulfill in the Christian family. This role is above all a service of love and a service of life. The love of husband and wife, which is blessed and sealed in the sacrament of marriage, constitutes the first way that couples exercise their mission. They serve by being true to themselves, to their vocation of married life. This love which embraces all the members of the family is aimed at forming a community of persons united in heart and soul, and indissoluble communion, where the love of spouses for each other is a sign of Christ's love for the Church. The service of life rests on the fact that husband and wife cooperate with God in transmitting the gift of human life, in the procreation of children. In this most sacred responsibility, the service of life is intimately united to the service of love in the one conjugal act which must always be open to bringing forth new life. In his encyclical Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI explained that in the task of transmitting life, husband and wife are called to conform their activity to the creative intention of God, expressed in the very nature of marriage and of its acts, and manifested by the constant teaching of the Church.
The Holy Father is really talking about the key to happiness, which again comes back to fidelity. And this is going to be the subject that we're going to be talking about now in this panel today. We're back with Fred Martinez, our expert on this subject, and Dr. Bernd Seeley. And the scripture that I would like to start off with is in St. Luke chapter 11. It says, "On Judgment Day, the men of Nineveh will stand up with this generation and condemn it, because when Jonah preached, they repented, and there is something greater than Jonah here." You know, Fred, certainly the Holy Father is something greater than Jonah, too, for our time. And he's preaching, but we're really not repenting. Are there any intellectuals that really agree with the Holy Father or the Pope on this issue?
There's two top intellectuals that really agree with the Holy Father. Norman Mailer, who is not a Catholic by any means.
That surprises me to hear that he agrees with the Holy Father in this issue.
Yeah, it is amazing, because he disagrees with the Father just about everything else. Norman Mailer wrote a book, The Prisoner of Sex, in the 70s. And he's a top intellectual. He's an existentialist. And what I'm going to do is just read what he said in this book. Yes, it is the irony of prison life that it is a world where everything is homosexual, and yet nowhere is the condition of being a feminine male more despised. It is because one is used, one is a blank without a womb. that is to say, without awe. Heterosexual sex with contraception has become, by this logic, a form of sexual currency closer to homosexual than to heterosexual, a clearinghouse for power, a market for psychic power, in which the stronger will use the weaker, and the female in the act, rather possessed of a vagina or a phallus, will look to ingest or steal the masculine qualities of the dominant. It could even be said that the development of women's lib may have run parallel to the promulgation of the pill.
That's Norman Mailer's.
That's Norman Mailer's.
Speaking about homosexuality within prisons, male.
Yeah, well, he covers a lot of things. But what he's saying is that when you contracept, you're in effect copying or imitating homosexual sex. And you're getting into what I call the politics of sex. Politics is about the use of power. And unfortunately, many of the groups, the feminist and the homosexual gay movement, are not into love, but they are into power, and they know how to use it. And what's happening is they're destroying love. It's just a situation of one person being oppressed by the other and trying to take the power away from the other. And it's what's really, I think, destroying our society. And that's what the Pope's saying. When you do the beautiful act, the marriage act, you have to do it out of love. And
this self-giving love, this
yes,
sacrificial love.
Total self-giving. But it has to be united to procreation, or as the Pope says, the gift of human life.
Yes.
If you say, I'm going to love, but I'm going to take out procreation or the gift of human life, it becomes a matter of power, trying to take something from the other instead of a matter of giving.
And it also is a contradiction of the term sacrificial love, because it's no longer an act of sacrificial love when you try to block or stop conception when it would otherwise occur.
Yeah, it's really true what you said, Doctor. And the opposite, though, we want to get into the positive also. And there was a psychiatrist who wrote an excellent book. Her name is Dr. Marie Robinson, a woman psychiatrist. And she covered what I call living sex. She said, you have to have procreation in the marital act. And what I have here is a letter that was written to Dr. Robinson by one of her former patients. But this feeling of power was quickly followed by an intense feeling of humility. I thought of how I held within me, within my body, the power to bring him the greatest joy or to deprive him of it. And then I realized the terrible thing it would ever be to misuse this power. And now I felt really for the first time, despite my former lip service to the idea, the reason why marriage must be sacramental. The relationship between husband and wife, which results in the unsolvable mystery of birth, goes far beyond human understanding. To participate in this mystery really requires a consecration by both. Any lesser attitude towards it is like the laughter of mockery in a holy place. And you see just the opposite of what you see in homosexual sex. You see a self-giving, a joy, a humility, where both are giving to the other. and there's happiness. It's not where somebody's trying to take something and use somebody as a thing, but where somebody really loves the other person as a person.
Husband and wife, matrimony. I mean, this is the only, because unless it's joined, as we were saying in the other program, unless it's involved, and here we have the Sacrament of Matrimony, which elevates us, and when we start to participate in the most powerful faculty man has is to cooperate with God in creating another human being that will last for all eternity. And it is the greatest faculty we have. And when it's used in the Sacrament of Matrimony, it is grace-filled. When it's used outside of it, it is so sinful, it becomes a sin that is destroying a whole generation.
And there again, it's separated from the procreative.
Right. That's
Within
right.
that context of
Person.
protection for the infant within marriage.
Right.
I think it's important also to get into the reasons why. Why did this happen to the United States? And Dr. Robinson got into that in her book. She explained what happened in the last century. Why did we suddenly see feminists? And it was very interesting. What she did is she just went back into the last century and she examined the whole change in society that happened. We changed from an agrarian society, a farming society, to an industrial society.
In a very short period of time.
Yes. And things are immensely different in those two types of societies. In one society, the husband and the wife cooperate intimately in the work. The husband is never very far off. He's out farming the land. The wife is in the home, and she's doing very important work. She's educating the children. She's making the clothes. She's cooking the food, and preserving the food. It's an essential job. And they have a really good distribution of the work there. And they get to see each other on a fairly common basis. When the industrial age came in, what happened? It took the husband away from the wife, across town. She wouldn't see her husband all day long.
That's true.
And it is very difficult for the wife. I know I have a sister, and she once told me, the reason, Fred, that I went to work is I wanted to be with my husband. She went out there to the same corporation. And there's a need for that. But when the industrial age came about, it took the husband out of the home. And next, it started destroying the role of the woman in the home. First, took away her role as teacher. A lot of people don't realize that until just recently, we didn't have a public education system. The mother taught her children the basics of religion and of reading and writing. Also, how to make clothes, the practical skills, how to cook, how to love other people, really, which is the most important. But what happened? Industrial age. First, they took the husband out into the industry, and then they took the children to the public schools, and then they started destroying her role. She was no longer the person that made the clothes because industry made the clothes. She was no longer the person that preserved the food because industry started making instant food. Next thing you found, the woman was sitting there, and they'd taken all the people that she loved, her husband, her children, and she was sitting there without anything to do. And that's exactly what happened. And you had two results according to Dr. Robinson. You had the feminists who came from the last century. There was a book written by Mary Walter Craft, if I remember, the first book on feminism. And you had the Puritan. And she considered them sisters. She said they were of the same type. Both of them saw this terrible thing happening. Their roles were being robbed. They were being stripped of the very meaning of their life. So they had to react. And the Puritan reacted by just saying there's no such thing as sex. and if there is, it's a sin. So let's not talk about it. Let's avoid it. And procreation is a sin. It's an evil thing. And feminists did the same thing, really. They rejected the female sexuality. And they said, if the husband's going to go to work, the children are going to go to school, I'm going to be a man. I'm going to get into the male sexuality. I'm going to go out there and work, the whole careerist mentality. And I'm going to get into promiscuity, as the men do, from one man to the next. And so they betrayed their sex, their very sexuality, because there was a problem. They had been robbed of their husband and of their children. And they dealt with it. They didn't see the whole picture in these two ways. And both of them were the same. Both of them were anti-sex. One just denied all sex, and they hated men, the Puritan. And the feminists denied feminine sex, and they just got into male sex. They wanted to be men, in other words. And you almost feel sorry for them, because there was reason to try and change what was happening, but they went after.
Their solution to the problem was wrong.
Their solution to the problem was wrong, and the answer is the Pope's solution. The Pope says the family is important, the home is important, female sexuality is important, male sexuality is important, the marriage act is important. All these things are beautiful. There's nothing sinful in the marriage act. It's a beautiful thing when done in love. Children are beautiful. Don't run away from the sexual act. It's something created by God. Don't run away from your own sexuality.
Right.
And that's exactly what's happening now. Most people don't go back to the roots of the problem. And they make a mistake. The feminists come out and they want to act like men. When a woman tries to act like a man, that throws everything off. The men don't know how. They just feel unnerved when there's a woman acting like a man.
Right.
And it just brings chaos to the society, because the male sexual identity is much more timid than the female sexuality. It's not as solid. The female sexuality is biologically very strong. Every month, the woman is reminded of her sexuality with her period. She can't get away from it. It's just something very solid. Whereas the male sexuality, there's only the sexual act and work. And if all of a sudden you have what is happening now, people are saying there's no such thing as a man or a woman. It's only social conditioning. You have what's happening now. You have confusion in terms of the sexual identity. You have women trying to act like men and men trying to act like women. And most unfortunate of all, we have a whole political movement, the feminist movement, that's trying to make women into men. And the homosexual movement that's just trying to destroy the whole identity, male identity, as contrasted with the female identity. I want to make one clarification, though. I'm speaking about feminism not from its social justice aspect. Sure, you always want whoever works on an equal basis to get equal pay, but I'm talking about it from the sexual politics aspect. And the key to this whole problem is going to what the Pope says. Do not separate the love significance from the procreative significance in marriage. Because
I don't know how much time we have left, but one thing, we might be misleading some of our listeners by thinking that we should, married couple should only have that intimate relationship when there's going to be a deliberate desire to have another child. And this is not the teaching of the Church necessarily, is it?
No. You've hit it right there. What we're talking about is one specific aspect, the marriage act. But the Pope speaks of the manifestation of affection. And he says there are many manifestations of affection. When a husband says to the wife, "I love you," you're showing your affection there. When you hold hands, when you sit together, there's many different ways of showing affection. But in terms of the most important expression, really, the most profound, as Pope calls it, the marriage act, you have to go with what the Pope calls the language of the body, which simply means God created all things.
Yes.
And He put a purpose into all things. And there's consequences if you misuse the purpose. And the purpose of sex is procreation, united with love. And that's where a lot of people have problems, especially some Catholics that don't agree with Vatican II.
Yes, well, we'll go more in detail as time goes on with this series, but that's such an important point to bring out in more detail. In other words, again, the Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI pointed out that each and every act of sexual union must be open to conception. So for many people then they're thinking, well, then the couple may only have intercourse when there is a deliberate desire to have a child. But there, as the Holy Father points out, there are times in which God's will would seem to be not now, but that does not mean they may not have the unitive and procreative acts together because they're taking advantage of the woman's natural infertile period. And I know I'm just throwing up words right now, but we will get into that later on.
Right. Natural family planning is
Right.
certainly open to the Church, as long as you're not limiting the number of children unnecessarily. Where the Pope talked about that on his first visit to the United States very, very clearly. He says
Right.
if you're doing it for purely economic reasons, you're making a mistake.
Right.
And
that's brought out here, too.
We'll be bringing that
That's
out in
brought out
our
here.
own shows. But I think he always brings it back to fidelity, and we're all looking for happiness. And there's just everybody wants happiness. It's ingrained in us. And the devil is out there trying to say you're going to get happiness this way, and it just doesn't work. Because as soon as you break from what God made us for, as soon as you start putting sugar water in a gasoline engine, it doesn't work. And God made us a certain way, and we're not going to run properly and efficiently and in a happy way unless we're doing it His way. And I think this is really what the Holy Father keeps bringing us back to, and this understanding, and it really boils down to fidelity. And we're that exclusive love. And I was thinking as you were talking today, because many women are now working today because of the economics, where before they were working and they didn't have to. Now many of them are working, they literally have to make ends meet because the costs are so high, education's so high and everything. And for a working mother, it's heroic, what they're going through. It's heroic. And there's so many women with their husbands have left them and they're supporting the family. Just incredible heroes out there. And then then we have another situation where the wife is at home, and it's true, the automation and everything else has taken a lot of the other work out of it. But this is where they could be spending so much time in their own neighborhood, rebuilding that structure in the Apostolate for Family Consecration, but rebuilding that structure for their family to have a God-centered environment, an activity that requires tremendous effort and tremendous work. And the husband certainly cooperates in this work, and others, but someone has to spend a great deal of time at it. And we see this with so many of our members where the couples are involved. And if the wife is home, naturally she can put more time into this work.
That's really, real freedom. She's free to really work for the family in a way that's so needed today.
That's right. So the importance of it is elevated to, the work is. So, and just in closing on these comments, I think we can start to see again, the beautiful logic of our faith. And God would never leave His children on earth without leadership. And we have that very solid leadership in the papacy. in the magisterium of the Church and the teachings of the Church. We understand that we're human and we can't possibly do these things without grace. And the Church is giving us these opportunities to grow in sanctifying grace. And we're going to break now, and we're going to pray together and sing together and share our spiritual insights in this profound work of Pope John Paul and his reflections on Humanae Vitae and Pope Paul VI's letter. And also Pope Paul VI's Humanae Vitae is the companion book, or our Prayers of Recommended Practices book. The next portion of our program now, the next show, will be Father Shustik, talking about this subject in a very prophetic way. And again, you're going to be listening to Professor Dumont and Dr. Seeley and Father Shustik being the man that I consider knows the Holy Father's teachings on ethics better than anyone in the world, because he had to represent the Holy Father at the Lublin University in Poland. The Holy Father held the chair of ethics there ever since he was a bishop. And Father Shustik, for 8 consecutive years, had to represent and teach the Holy Father's teachings on morals and ethics, sexual ethics. So I think you're going to find this second portion to be very, very informative. And we'll be back then within an hour with that. Thank you. God bless.